Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Cole. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective discussion. I select topics to discuss with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track those predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest for this episode is Adam Blanchat. Adam is currently an undergraduate student at Kansas State University studying industrial engineering with a minor in business administration. Adam grew up on a family farm in south central Kansas and plans to take full ownership of the farm as the fifth generation owner and operator someday. Adam hopes to bring a new vision to farm management after he graduates from Kansas State University and comes back to work full time on the family farm. On this episode, Adam and I discuss the future of the American farmer and organic agriculture. Adam, thanks so much for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. Let me start by asking you to walk me through the general state of agriculture and the direction you think it's heading.
Well, Ben, I just want to start off. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. I actually was happy that I got to meet with you. I was in a MC 165 class and you came by and presented, and got to say the podcast looked really, really interesting. So just wanted to reach out and glad we were able to get this all set up.
Yeah.
I guess to answer your question overall is I want to start off with like how it first was, at least the frontier, at least 100 years ago. My family farm, for instance, was started in 1902, and as you pointed out earlier, I would be generation number five. It's currently being run and operated by generation number four, which is my dad. But I've always been told back when my grandfather, and definitely my great grandfather, was farming. The way Dad describes it is that everybody was a lot smaller, for instance. And typically speaking, the average farm would survive is probably the right word, I would say, is about 80 acres or a quarter, which is 160 acres. Most farmers you'll meet here in Kansas, even here in the Midwest, will call it a quarter, but 80 to 160 acres is what the typical farm had. And that was normally enough to sustain a family of five or even 10. Like families back then were rather large just because there's two reasons. One, you wanted some free labor. And two, back in the day, unfortunately, not all kids made it, all the way to adulthood, unfortunately. Now, luckily, my family, when my dad was growing up, they were able to. But long story short, the way dad described it was before, mechanical tools were available, such as tractors. Everybody had mules and horses or bulls, and that's how they typically was able to do field work. Each farm had a huge barn, and typically, the bigger the barn, the bigger the farm you were. It was kind of have a good general case of how people could tell how big each operation was, and like I said, 160 acres or so was generally enough for each farm to sustain itself. My family back then had about two or three quarters, I want to say. So we were rather, fairly large, not huge, but bigger. But then the way Grandpa had always described it was each farm was relatively small until the invention of the four-wheel drive tractor, which is those big articulated ones you can search up or even see while you're driving down the freeway. That basically all that really did was it allowed each farmer to farm more acres. So size growth wasn't necessarily hindered by not just finances, but also just could you even work that amount of ground? You need so much labor and so much time on your hands that it would be essentially impossible, just some mules or small tractors. Once the equipment finally caught up with the growth of agriculture, it's gotten to the point now as the years have gone by is the bigger guys get bigger and the smaller guys usually get swallowed up or they just get kind of hindered with growth because bigger guys usually have better cash flow and better capital to where they're able to bring out loans and purchase more land. So, long story short, when things started, things were a lot smaller. And dad remembers being able to see a farm or at least a house every mile or so. As days have gone by, that has quickly dwindled. Either those houses get abandoned or they no longer have family farms on them. It's just maybe a family, if that. Every mile or so used to have a house. Not so much the case anymore. I would say every few miles, if you're lucky, you'll find a house that is occupied by a family, and you'll even be luckier if it's actually a family farm that's being, fairly run, full-time farm operation, I would say. Um, I believe nowadays, I believe the average size of a farm is about 1,000 acres now. So you went from 160 clear to 1,000 acres now in today's day and age. But keep in mind that also involves people that are hobby farming, is what I like to call it. Meaning they only have 80 or 40 acres or so, and they're just kind of doing it on the side, which is fine, nothing wrong with that at all. But there's a lot more of those in the full-time operators. So that kind of brings that acre count down quite a bit. I would venture to guess 2,000 is probably a more accurate number for the full-time guys, but it depends on where you're at. Guys in Iowa typically have more than guys here in Kansas. It just kind of varies on where you're at. But that's generally or so kind of the current situation of agriculture. Essentially, the mindset is you have to get bigger in order to have more cash flow and more income for the operation. And that has been kind of the problem with agriculture as a whole, in my opinion, where I'm mostly concerned. When you have this, I guess, culture or idea that you have to get bigger in order to be successful, that drives land prices up, that drives equipment cost up. I mean, it's just got to the point now where guys like me, now, luckily, I'm in a good situation to where I have a family and they support me and they're able to kind of help me get into the starting the whole ag industry. But guys that aren't as lucky, or gals, people that aren't as lucky, they're at the point now where, let's say you're in a small town or a city and you decide, hey, I want to farm. There's not a whole lot that's there for you to get your foot in the door to get started in the industry. I mean, here in Kansas, I recently was a part of a land acquisition where it was $3,600 per acre to buy a piece of land. You take that times 80 acres, you're well over $200,000 just for a relatively small piece of ground. And so that's just to start off. And land prices are a huge hurdle. Equipment, fertilizer, you're getting through all these sorts of hurdles you have to get through. And quite honestly, I would consider farming to be one of the worst businesses when it comes to starting off, and possibly one of the worst businesses as a whole in terms of pure numbers. And so there's many concerns, I would say, when it comes to the younger side of agriculture. I mean, the future overall does have a mix of both good and bad. The bad, I would say, is medium to small farms will start to go away and we'll start to see more larger, some people even like to call it corporate farming, a little dirty word in the agriculture industry, I would say. Not as many family farms, more corporatized type of agriculture. Government overreach kind of concerns me a little bit overall when it comes to that. Um, and the reason I say that is I don't have a necessarily a problem with regulation as a whole. It's more of regulation that comes around that is in ignorance. Like the people don't understand exactly what they're talking about, which when you have an industry as vast as agriculture, it's hard to really understand every key of it. So when you start passing regulations that doesn't have a full understanding of what you're talking about, then you start to have issues of government overreach, and it just doesn't make sense for the farmer or the consumer as a whole. So there's a lot of areas that are concerning to me. Again, it promotes larger scale farming. However, there are multiple opportunities with agriculture as a whole. So there's good and bad when it comes to the future. But I guess to sum up the entire question is the small guys are starting to get absorbed by the big guys, generally speaking. Some farming communities, I would like to say the one I grew up in, we kind of look after each other fairly well. So maybe that kind of process will slow down, but in general, it's going to be small guys get smaller, bigger guys get bigger, and it's going to be really hard for guys or gals that are not as lucky as I was to be born and raised on a farm that want to farm. It's going to be hard to get your foot in the door. I think you can, and I hope more people do. We need more farmers, but it's just a hard industry and a hard business to get started, much less maintain.
Yeah. So when I talked to you after the class a couple weeks ago, you mentioned that you're interested in organic farming. And I've heard of that before. Some of my background is agriculture, especially international agriculture. So, uh, maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you and your dad are doing right now in the realm of organic farming.
Yeah, so that's a good question because organic farming is another opportunity. Because like I said earlier, there's good and bad with the future of agriculture. And organic is just one of the many opportunities that guys like me can, look at. I would say we're a decently sized farm. We're not huge by any stretch of the imagination. And that was one of Dad's concerns about me coming back. He was like, I don't know, Adam, I don't know if the farm is big enough for you, 10 years from now. Is it going to be big enough to sustain you and your family? And I was like, that's a valid concern, Dad, and all that kind of stuff. So I started thinking about, are there other ways to make money in this business besides just getting bigger? Because that's just the default mindset that everybody has is just get bigger and you'll be fine. Well, problem is when you buy a piece of ground, you take out a loan, there's a lot of interest, a lot of issues with that. And so basically you're kind of chasing your tail the entire time of just trying to pay off so many land payments. And that can work if it's set up correctly, but unfortunately, a lot of cases it's not, and you just don't have the balance sheet to support such a thing. So I thought to myself, okay, what are ways I can take the acres we have now and make them more productive? And now, when I say production, I don't mean bushels or the amount of wheat or cattle that we're making. I'm talking pure dollars. When I say production, that's what I'm meaning. I could care less if this means we make less, bushels per acre. As long as we've got more money or profit per acre or cash flow per acre, that's what I'm really worried about. And so years and years ago, I would say my freshman, sophomore year or so, Dad actually looked into organic wheat production himself. And we had a connection with a guy in Oklahoma who's now currently a full-time organic farmer. He's been very successful with it. And him and Dad started working with each other when they both started into this whole deal. And perks of organic is this. Usually wheat per bushel sells at about $5, $6 a bushel. Nowadays, the current market, organic wheat sales are about $13 to $19 a bushel. So there's a big markup in terms of what you can get per bushel. Now, there's a lot of issues with organic, and I'll kind of get into that as to why Dad himself ended up not doing it. Um, Basically at first Dad was all excited. I was like, oh my goodness, let's do it. It can't be that hard. But unfortunately, the biggest obstacle as to why most guys don't do it is that in order to sell that wheat as organic, is that it has to be certified by the USDA themselves. And that certification takes time. It basically takes 3 years from when you first last applied a product that they call is not, organic in any case, such as urea. They will take that last time you applied it and add 3 years and then to it, and they'll say, okay, that is when we will come out and, look at your operation, give you the thumbs up or thumbs down. Long story short is, let's say you applied fertilizer in January of 2024, for instance. Well, you add 3 years to that, you will not be certified until January of 2027. So a lot of time going through there. And the problem is that during that time, you are applying organic fertilizer, which is very expensive. I'll give you some numbers. Again, just quick numbers. Conventional fertilizer for wheat usually costs around $100 an acre. Organic, on the other hand, is about $300 an acre. So a huge markup in your investment costs every single year. If you're certified and you're able to sell organic wheat, not a big deal. But when you're putting organic fertilizer into the field and then you're selling it as conventional wheat at that much cheaper cost, you can pretty much figure on losing money for 3 years. And for most operations and most businesses, much less farming businesses, where the margins are so tight, that can make or break a program pretty badly. And so that was the first initial, like, oh my gosh, I don't know about this. Secondly, Dad didn't even know if we'd be able to sell the darn stuff. I mean, it's not just like here in conventional farming when you go to the local co-op, dump your load and sell it, and that's it. No, you have to reach out to various mills and you have to get pretty creative when it comes to selling this stuff. You have to reach out to the correct people. Various regulations, one screw up, they may give you a warning, but it depends on how bad the screw up was. Say, you hired the co-op to go spray one of your conventional fields, but they go to the wrong field, which is organic, and they spray a bunch of glyphosate out there, for instance. They will take your certification away due to somebody else's mistake. So one single issue can set you back 3 years, and you're going to lose money for an additional 3 years. and there's nothing really much you can really do about it. So there's a lot of hurdles that will go into organic certification. So that, among a million other concerns, Dad kind of just realized, okay, I'm at the age where I don't need to take this big of a risk for the business. I'm set up fine financially. Why the heck would I do this? I don't see why I would take this risk. It could be beneficial, but it's also like I don't need to take it. So he kind of backed out of it. A couple of years go by. That guy in Oklahoma is doing very well for himself. And I think about it. I talk with Dad and says, well, how'd that end up working out for him? He's like, oh, he's very successful. I was like, how do you know? I said, I drove in his yard one time. Every single piece of equipment is brand new. It looks good. Place just looks nice. And he asked him, is it worth it? And the guy said, I would not go back. So we thought it'd be rude to ask specifics, but overall, he's been doing, very well. There have been issues, but overall, it's been good for him. And so I thought to myself, maybe that's an opportunity. And I went and visited him multiple times. He's kind of taken me under his wing and really helped me out a lot with this whole process. And this is during the time I'm like a freshman in college here at K-State. And I'm still kind of on the fence, like, do I want to go back and farm? Do I not? Like, I got to make sure at least I can make it work if I'm going to do something like that. And long story short is after my visit and doing my own research and the whole idea, I called Dad and said, hey, I think we should do it. I think I can make this work. And so Dad basically was like, okay, here's what we'll do. We're going to take two of our best pieces of ground, 2 quarters, which is 300 acres in total. We're going to take those or those 2 fields, and we're going to do it, and you're going to be in charge of it. Okay, like you will manage it all, and you're gonna take care of it. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And right now we are in year 2 of transition. Transition process started 2 years ago, or a year and a half or so ago, and our first organic wheat harvest will be in 2026. So we're in the middle of it right now. We're in the middle of all this process. There's been a lot of money invested into it. Some of Dad's money, some of my own money. Um, and I've now actually purchased my own piece of ground to where I'm also transitioning that to organic. So, there's a lot of investment when it comes to it. It's a long-term sort of deal, and there have been some, hiccups here and there, but overall it's been going in the right direction, and we're still learning as we go by.
Yeah, so you mentioned it costs a lot more to start the process. I mean, 3 times more for pesticides and everything else. Um, so with this person, this farmer in Oklahoma, sorry, um, at what point did he feel comfortable? Obviously he's invested a lot of money, and he thought, well, okay, I'll invest 3 times more. At
Mhm.
what point did he feel comfortable with his decision? Was it 3 years later? Was it take more time than that?
So yeah, so that's the I don't know if the word comfortable is correct because I don't think he's ever comfortable. I don't think I'll ever be comfortable entirely with it. Because it's a different way of farming. I mean, a lot of people just say, well, you're just farming wheat. You've been doing that for decades or centuries even. Like, what's the difference? Like, no, it's a completely different mindset and way of thinking when it comes to farming. And, you know, his saying is he's always learning. He never knows anything 100%. He's always looking for new ways to farm, new ways to make this organically work. And so I can't speak that exactly as to when he was comfortable, but I would say I would say he's pretty well established now. He's got a good presence and a pretty sizable operation to where it's working very well for him. Again, there's been hiccups like one of his, actually, I don't want to get into his concerns. That's none of my business personally. But overall, he's been doing very well for himself. And I am truly thankful that I was kind of worried about like, I hate to go down there and kind of ask him like, hey, how do you do this? Because, that's intellectual property to him. But no, he's been very, very helpful with everything. And I'll call him every couple weeks or so and say, hey, I got, we'll just brainstorm ideas at this point. And it's gotten to the point where I've given him some ideas he's applied in his operation. He's given me ton in return. So it's kind of that beneficial relationship has been very, I would say, huge. Because problem with organic is that there's not a rule book out there really on how to do it. There's obviously conventional farming, and K-State here has done like hours upon hours of research to make conventional guys, make their lives better. There's a lot more information with that. With organic, you can get a general sense on how to do it, but it's so hard to apply it to specific operations because the way I farm in South Central Kansas is going to be completely different than how somebody farms in Northern Oregon, for instance. Like it's so many different situations, specifically with weather, climate, local markets. It's just all over the place. So to have someone like that that's relatively local, is relatively in the same situation as us, that was probably the decider of whether or not we were going to pursue this. To have someone like that, I guess, help us out with it. Um, back to more concerns, I guess. His first harvest, he'll tell you first, was not very good. He didn't really have a good crop. There's a lot of weeds out there, and it just didn't look very impressive. He would say that himself to you. But like he said, he's always learning. And as the years have gone by, he has improved his crop. And the general sense with organic is that your yield or your production bushels wise per acre will go down. His has actually gone up long term because his soil is healthier. He's overall got just a healthier soil and thus a healthier plant. So they're not as susceptible to things like diseases and weeds. So that's one of the benefits of organic. And why I think it is important that consumers are big on that. There's zero glyphosate. There's you mentioned pesticides. That is a no-go with organic. Like pesticides are just off the table. The only forms of inputs that you can have are basically organically based, and any input you put out there, you have to contact your certifier who work directly with the USDA, and they will basically give you a thumbs up or thumbs down and whether or not you can put that on your field. So basically, anytime you put anything out there, just double check with them, and they will basically give you the thumbs up, thumbs down. And if you don't do that, there's a very high risk that will knock you out of the program. So there's various risks to that, and I was again fortunate to have someone like that kind of guide me along the correct path. I mean, our first harvest during transition year, which was this past summer. We actually had a very, very good harvest. Part of that, I think, was the organic fertilizer, but also we just had good weather hit at the right time. And part of that was chicken litter was the main fertilizer we used. The guy in Oklahoma didn't know that during his first harvest. Now he's using it, and he said, "Hey, if you want to look at organic fertilizer, chicken litter is probably the way to go." That helped me a lot in terms of getting a head start in terms of the learning curve of organic, and we thus had a very good harvest. Now, will we have a good harvest every single year? Doubtful. That's just not how farming works. But hopefully, we can have a good average as the years go by, and we'll end up being pretty good financially as long as we hit that certification, organic certification window.
Thanks, Adam. Hey, I'm just thinking about our listeners, and some of our listeners may not know what organic farming is. So maybe you can help them understand a little bit better by describing organic farming.
Yeah, sure. So there's a big difference between the two word terms there's conventional farming, which is basically all other forms of farming. In a sense, there's obviously various other deals within that, but as a general case, there's conventional farming and then there's organic farming overall. And what organic farming typically is, that is defined by the USDA, is basically the growing and processing of food without any synthesized fertilizers or pesticides. That includes GMOs. So GMOs are off the table when it comes to that. Which GMOs, for those who don't know, is genetically modified organism, which overall is labs. Corn and soybeans are big with this. Labs will go in and mess with the genes of the corn to make it more disease resilient or make it, more calories or whatever. They'll just, whatever desires are needed at the time, they will mess with the genes. And various studies have suggested that has some possible health issues with it. So the general market, when it comes to organic and the definition, includes GMOs to not be a part of that. Now, luckily, wheat by default is non-GMO. So all wheat that is grown in the United States, whether it's organic or conventional, is non-GMO. That is one of the many requirements. But to kind of put it in a general sense, chemicals that are based in, petroleum, for instance, just chemicals as a whole, that includes fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, all of that off the table. And you replace that with, again, more organically based products instead. So manure is like a more natural sense. So just kind of think of it like Oh, I don't know. Think of it like processed foods, for instance. Let's, stay on the topic of food. Say like chicken nuggets and just stuff it's not good for you, candy, just all that kind of stuff just is not good for you healthy, but it's easy and it's relatively cheap. Fast food as well. And then that is generally conventional farming, which I have no problem with conventional farmers. So I just want to be also preference that. I mean, most of our operation is conventional as a whole. So it's not like I'm badgering conventional farmers at all. But to kind of take the fast food and just more unhealthy side of things, just ultra processed food, and compare it to more natural foods like steak, vegetables, fruits that, aren't going through a horrible processing. Like it's more natural stuff. That's what organic typically is. I'm trying to phrase it in a way to where the average listener will kind of understand it, generally speaking. And so the biggest difference I would say is fertility is kind of how I would say is the big difference between the two. Like I mentioned earlier, GMO is another big difference, but again, wheat is already non-GMO, so that's not a huge concern to us personally. But when it comes to fertility, is another big one. There's typically three forms of conventional fertilizer. There's a liquid, which is 28% nitrogen or 32%. Or there's a more solid, which is what we usually urea. It's like the dry fertilizer. And gardeners and lawn cares, that's typically probably what you see. You'll see a dry spin, and you'll see those little white flakes going all over a lawn. And for instance, if you're driving by, you may even use it on your own lawn. That's like dry fertilizer is kind of how we look at it. And then there's a ammonia base, which is more gaseous form, and you inject it into the ground, and that becomes available for the plant later on. So those are the three main forms. And the reason I bring that up is that while those do have the elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, salt, like all sorts of nutrients that a plant needs, it's in an inorganic form, and that has various concerns. One, soil health is a huge thing that comes to mind, especially ammonia, which is the gaseous form I mentioned earlier. That has serious, consequences to soil life and the soil biology as a whole. Various studies have shown that it's one of the cheaper routes for conventional fertilizer, but it has a huge drawback to the environment and the soil health as a whole. And there are studies to where that is shown to be to end up in the food product as a whole. Not as common, but there is still traces of it. The main concern is your soil health when it comes to that. And there's other concerns, salt level, like there's a ton of salt in all those processed products when it comes to that, and that just has a huge detriment to your soil health, and it does also end up in the final food product as a whole. So while there are benefits to conventional fertilizer, organic, on the other hand, is again more natural. What you would typically find in nature, for thousands of years, our soil has benefited from more natural forms of fertilizer. And again, manure is the biggest way to get large amounts of organic fertilizer all in one go. I mentioned chicken litter, for instance. That's one of the best bang for your buck, I would say, for an organic fertilizer. There's also cattle manure, there's hog manure, like all sorts of various forms of manure. I'm even looking into a fertilizer product where they take bone meal. So there's a processing plant in Wichita, and they grind all the bones that they use at the meat processing plant and turn it into kind of a powdery kind of substance. And you can just spread that on your field, and that's another form of natural fertilizer. So the benefit is that overall your soil health is better, which thus means a healthier plant, and you're not getting those possible chemicals, lead, and salt within the plant itself and in the final food product, which the consumer will have. So there are healthy benefits to having an organically based food product. And the final big difference, I would say, is pesticides and herbicides completely off the table. Not if you have a field full of weeds and your crop is already there, I'm sorry, you're going to have to find different ways to deal with that. Bugs, let's say your field is infected with bugs, you're gonna have to get pretty creative. I mean, the guy in Oklahoma, and that's an idea I'm thinking about as well, is that he's gonna put up bat houses and basically attract bats, and they'll be a kind of a natural form of pesticide against pests like bugs. So, there are, and the deeper you go into it, the more you'll realize how much of a difference there really is. But those are the three main ones I would say when it comes to growing the plant. Now, I can't speak for the processing side of things because I'm not a processor, I'm a grower. But there are huge differences there as well, possibly even more. I know they don't bleach the flour when it comes to organic wheat, that they can't bleach it, and they're not pumping it full of chemicals and other unhealthy substances. So, all in all, I guess to sum it all up in terms of organic versus conventional, conventional is cheaper, usually easier to grow, which thus means a cheaper product for the consumer. However, there are a lot of health benefit or a lot of health drawbacks to that for the consumer, as well as um, it just is not as good for your soil, and it's also going to be a much less healthy plant. And you compare it with organic, a lot more expensive to grow, thus a little bit more expensive for the consumer. However, much more better health benefits. Your soil is going to end up being healthier as a whole. Like for instance, to give you some hard numbers, I mean, just this past year, we saw an uptake in our organic matter levels, which means we tested the soil before we put the chicken litter on. A year goes by, that chicken litter breaks down naturally in the soil, and all of a sudden, our organic matters have bumped up a few notches. So that tells me that our soil is being built and it's being healthier and it's recovering from the decades and decades of non or of conventional fertilizer. Um, so there are many benefits to that, but again, think of junk food and just ultra processed stuff when you're putting in your body and compare it to the more healthier stuff that you could put in your body. That's the biggest difference I would say between the two.
Well, there's a real focus right now, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s really shed some light, put some light on this right now with chronic illness in the United States, not just the United States, but globally. And he really, if the Trump administration wins, which he's decided to go ahead and, endorse Trump, he's really going to focus on mitigating chronic illness. And he thinks a lot of it has to do with what we're putting in our bodies for diet. And so it seems to me that this organic farming may be somewhat of a solution to that. And like you said, I don't think it's against or the United States is against conventional farming, but it seems to me that for health and diet, making the soil better and more nutrient for the plants, reducing, mitigating pesticides. It seems to me that organic farming really is the future. But all that to say, it's a lot more expensive. So my question to you really is this: are there, or do you think the future will provide more incentives for farmers to do to conduct organic farming? Or are you seeing that already?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot there. I guess in a local sense, in terms of if guys are more interested in organic production, I've got plenty of neighbors that kind of reached out to me. At first, they were just, I could tell they were kind of like, nah, this ain't gonna work. This guy's crazy. Like this just ain't gonna work. And after church, every Sunday, some guys would come ask me, say, "Hey, what are you doing out there? Like I saw some manure spreaders. What's that about?" I was like, "Oh, we're gonna try this, one thing. It's we're just gonna see what happens. It is what it is. Try to keep it kind of low profile, kind of a deal." And after our first harvest, I was expecting a horrible crop, just horrible. Like we've never done this before. Let's just see what happens. Ended up being one of our best crops in the past, few years at least. And so now I've gotten some, neighbors kind of reach out to me saying, "Hey, what's that all about? Walk me through it a little bit." And I was like, "Well, I don't want to give you bad advice. Get back with me after a little bit, after I, really understand, I guess here in this case, what we're looking at. But here's what I know so far." And they're kind of at the point now where they're just kind of curiously watching us and seeing if it's something to look into. Um, on a large scale, will the United States make it more enticing to do organic? They could. As of now, as far as I'm aware, there's no subsidies out there. There are government programs if you farm a certain way. Unfortunately, their ways doesn't line up with what works for us. They want a lot of cover crops, for instance. Sorry, we're in South Central Kansas where it gets dry. Cover crops just don't work. So there are those, and maybe we'll see more of those pop up here and there. We could see an organic subsidy saying if you're certified organic, here's a subsidy. I have mixed feelings about that because one, like me as an organic farmer, I would selfishly say, yeah, give me that subsidy. But also it's just like I don't like taking money from the government, and dad doesn't. I know a lot of neighbors don't either. So I kind of have mixed feelings when it comes to that sort of deal. But will I see more organic production as a whole? I don't think it'll ever be the majority. I really don't think it'll. I think it'll always be a niche market mostly because of that 3-year transition. I mean, that in and of itself scares most guys away, rightfully so. I mean, if I'm doing well with cattle or conventional farming, or I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to take that risk, similar to what Dad's situation was. And then you juxtapose that to guys that aren't doing very well, unfortunately, and that is a case. They are at the point now where they just financially can't get through those 3 years, unfortunately. So I always think it'll be a bit of a niche. In organic production by itself is just more expensive. So the general consumer is going to think finances, which is short term, rather than their health, which is long term. I would definitely urge them to really think long term for with organic and more healthier food. But I understand as a whole that the average American just isn't going to think that way, and that's understandable. So I guess to answer your question, will we have more organic production? I think we will, as this sort of idea spreads and it gets more, there's more knowledge about it and more guys understand it more. But I think it'll always be a niche in the market. So we'll just kind of see how that goes. I think RFK is on the right path when it comes to, I guess, encouraging healthier diets. I mean, it's actually encouraged me to my own life to be a little healthier. I'm a college student, so I'm not always thinking about that, but it's really gotten me to reflect on that. And I'll say as a whole, what with organic production, I selfishly went into the, not selfishly, but I originally went into this thinking finance, how am I going to make my family operation work? But as years have gone by, I'm like, hey, I'm providing a really good product, a really good healthy product for, my consumers out there. That feels good. That feels good that we're doing, that sort of thing. And, business wise, we're hopefully going to, benefit greatly from it. So overall, everybody wins. That's a perfect scenario. It's not a perfect world. I get that. It's probably not going to be the case. But to answer your question, I think we'll see it uptake in organic production, but it'll always be a niche overall. More consumers are looking for organic, according to the USDA, but it's just that 3-year transition, just the amount of hurdles you have to get through. And if you make one mistake, Ben, it's over. You have to start all over, and you got to make the decision: do I even want to go back to organic? 'Cause that's a heck of an investment. So there's various hurdles, various drawbacks to it, but as a whole, I think it'll increase, but never be the majority.
Well, it's really risky, and so that's why whether you agree with it or not, I think if there is more regulation, governmental regulation, and really more than that, governmental incentives to provide subsidies to farmers to encourage them to produce more organic products. Um, if research that's being done across the United States currently and continues to demonstrate that our diets, when our diets change and it reduces chronic illness, if chronic illness can be reduced, that means a lot less money that's going to the medical industry. People are healthier, people are feeling better, just almost everything increases in a positive way if people are healthier because of the food that they're eating. So to me, it kind of depends on what happens with the farm bill, and then
Yeah,
which side of the aisle is really going to focus on this after the presidential election. Because Democrats could focus on this too. Right now, RFK is kind of pushing Republicans, but it could be the Democrats that push this too. So I really think I agree with you that it's a niche, but if a niche could become something pretty big if farmers are incentivized and can make more money on it, and everybody's winning and everybody's eating and everybody's health is better. So who
right.
knows? You may be right. It could just stay a niche, but if there really is some empirical evidence to demonstrate that organic food is helping us and reducing our chronic illness, that could change. That could change the future for the better. So, I really appreciate, Adam, that you're staying with this, and it's obvious to me that you have a desire and a passion for farming, and I'm really glad to see that you're the fifth generation farmer. Knowing that that your farm goes back to the early 1900s, and you still want to be part of that. Um, it just seems like there's a lot of I guess students your age who uh, get into an undergraduate experience and they're like, yeah, I'm not sure I want to go back to that. I really appreciate that you want to do that. It's really I think you should be proud of that. And so, speaking of that, why do you think the family farm is so important to you? And what makes you want to come back to the family farm?
Yeah, that's a good question, and sometimes I ask myself that a lot. I'm big on self-reflection and understanding what I want to do. I mean, I think I could speak for most farm kids, especially for the past few decades. We were always told, and that go get a career. You don't want to come back to this life. You barely make any money. You're going to work your tail off from sun up to sundown every single day, and there's not much rewards in terms of finances. Go get a career. That's what I was always told when I was a kid growing up. I mean, even whenever I finally sat down with dad, and I don't blame him at all. He just wants what's best for me. Like I get it. And he basically sat me down when I sat him down and said, "Hey, I think I want to do this. I think I can do this." This was after I kind of made the deal of like, I want to do this and I can do this. I can do this. And he was just like, "You sure? You really sure?" Like he's super supportive now, and I can't thank him enough at all. Like that was, without his support, there's no way in heck I could be in this business at all. And but even then, like after saying that, he would just kind of once in a while just say like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And again, I don't blame him at all because he just wants what's best for me. He lived through a time where he made a lot of his, I guess, success from cattle, and cattle is not an easy business to be in at all. I mean, he would tell me stories to where he would get up at 4 a.m. It's freezing cold outside. You get out, he feeds cattle, and he's out on the four-wheeler, which so that cold air just blasting on his face all day long. He has to check cattle, and cattle are getting sick, they're dying. You gotta wrestle them, you gotta give them shots, you gotta do all this stuff just to basically baby them. And he gets home around midnight, 11 o'clock or so, and his face is just pure red, just frozen. He's, probably sick. I mean, there was plenty of times where he was sick as well. Doesn't matter. Get out of bed, get to work, let's go. And he was the only guy out there because I was too young, and his daughters were either too young or doing their own thing. And that was the thing that really bugged him a lot, or not bugged him, but really got to him once in a while is he doesn't see his family. Like there was times where he just didn't see them. He wasn't around because he had to provide for them. Well, that unfortunately means he's not around. And he was just saying like, "Do you want this life? Because it will be your life, and there will be times where your wife and your kids will have to take a step back, and the farm takes priority." And I was like, "Yes, I'm prepared for that." And I think a lot of kids my age or young adults would say, I had that same experience of go get a career. And you're starting to see it with pure numbers. I mean, the average age of a farmer, I believe, according to the US, is 57 and a half years old. I mean, that's up there. Um, that also adds to the whole idea of bigger guys get bigger, smaller guys get smaller. Those small and medium-sized farmers or small to medium-sized farms, their owner and operator is 57 and a half years old, let's say. 10 years from now, they're either going to retire and unfortunately pass away. What happens to that farm? If there's a son or a daughter there that wants to take it over, great. More times there's not. And the bigger guys come in and take and buy the land, and that's it. So, there is opportunity there for young guys. But overall, that was kind of my experience when choosing that. What made me want to choose it was overall, I got more involved with the business as a whole. I wasn't just driving the tractor. I was involved with financial choices. I had my own cow calf herd at this time now. And it got to the point now where if we were making decisions on what route to take the business down, dad would kind of turn to me and say, "Well, what do you think?" And he was asking some high school kid at this time. So I started having some more and more input as the years go by, and I was more involved with the operation. And I started realizing, okay, I really like this. Like I can see myself do it because I didn't just see it as like some farmer with a straw hat and all that kind of stuff. I was saw as this is a business. I would own and operate my own business if I did this. And I understand how the business works, and I'm passionate about it. And then so that kind of got me involved with it. Then I started learning more about our family history. I won't get into it, but overall, it was just very interesting how we ended up in South Central Kansas, how it started. And dad loves history as a whole. He loves family history and just American history and everything else in between. So, I got to hear that from him and his passion from it. And I was just like, wow, like there's a lot that's happened here. It would feel great to kind of take that on and be the next, step in that. Um, and so I understood that it's a business. I can run this business. I can do it. And I at least I have confidence that I can do it. And, having, your family support you, you have, all those generations behind you, and you hopefully have more generations in front of you. It's hard to describe, but having that a part of you is just like, yeah, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I know a lot of guys personally, and a lot of guys online, they're starting to share their agriculture experience online. That's becoming more of a thing. And they kind of share the same sentiment. This is what we want to do. It's a way of life. It's not an easy way of life by any means, but it's something that we have a passion for, and you won't get much recognition for it most cases, but it's a heck of a life. So that's in general, that's kind of what made me make my decision. I feel like it's in my blood, and I feel like I have big passion for it. And long story short, I don't know if I would be happy cooped up in an office every single day of my life. I understand that that's not the case for all careers, but that's just kind of a joke that a lot of farmers will say to each other, saying, "Hey, it's better than being in a cubicle all day." So it is what it is.
Well, I can definitely tell you have passion just for this conversation right now, but I can also see your dad's viewpoint here, being a dad myself of
Mm,
four kids. You really want the best for your kids, and so I can see him looking at his job, looking at what you could do, and looking at all the possibilities, and wondering if this is the right life for you. At the same time, probably at the very same time, wondering gosh, it'd be great if he could take over, but I want to be honest with him about this, So, and at the same time, and I don't want to really go negative on this, but I mean, your dad sounds like a pretty smart guy, and he's probably looking around and looking at the industry, and he's probably seeing the suicide rates of farmers. Maybe has some
exactly.
friends and people he knows, so he may be thinking, a lot of people have such rough times in this business that they just can't take it anymore. So, uh, what do you think about I think USDA said that the farmer has a three times higher percentage of suicide than just the average person in the United States. So, what are your thoughts on that? And did that ever come up with your dad when he was talking to you?
Yeah, gosh, talk about a stressful job.
Yeah.
So I don't, thankfully, I don't know anybody personally that did go through all with that. I don't think dad does either. I hope he doesn't. But I do know tons of guys that went through a ton of stress. And you got to think of it this way. You are your own owner and operator. When you own your own business, you have, health insurance. You've got, you know, barely any life insurance. You basically have no net under you. Basically, this is going to work or you're going to go under, bankrupt, bad. Um, and it's the type of thing that farming is a horrible business because there's a lot of things you can't control, and one of them is the weather. It's one of the few businesses where weather is a factor in how things are run. And, dad says it's kind of a double-edged sword because he's a competitive guy. So you kind of feel like he's competing against nature all the time. So if he gets the field planted before that big rain hits, he's like, I beat Mother Nature today. But other times where usually Mother Nature beats him, usually because you can't predict that. You just can't. And so you add that layer of stress. It's just farming in and of itself is one of the worst businesses to be a part of. Margins are so tight. A lot of times the goal is just to break even. And that is, again, one of the few businesses where that is the motto. Survive is essentially a survive. And if you got any chance to grow, you take it. Because again, you got, most farmers have a family. You got a wife or a husband and you got some kids there. They depend on you. And if you fail, if this business fails, they fail. And just having that weight on them. And you add on like, dad's situation, he had a year, I believe it was 2012 or so, whatever. Cattle were just dying left and right. Didn't matter what kind of medications or how well he took care of them because he took care of his animals very well. It's just the way it is. Sometimes disease just hits you and there's nothing you can do about it. And he just talks about adding the stress is insane. It's just insane. And um, like you said, suicide rate, is triple the amount of the average American. It makes sense when you actually are a part of the industry. And by no means is it easy. You don't go into farming thinking you're going to make big bucks. That's just the way it is. You go do something else instead. Um, but I'm also being very negative about it. There's also huge benefits to it as well. So it's more of if you're built for it, if you're passionate about it, and do you have a good foundation for it, which I hope I hit all three marks of those. And the foundation is definitely to Dad's credit. I mean, despite the stress, despite the struggles, and I was at the tail end of it. He's a little bit more established now, but I have siblings that a lot older than me that were not at the tail end of it, and they say they saw a different dad once in a while. And the nice thing about dad is I want to give him credit. He never took it out on the kids. He never took it out on his wife. He was always happy and joyful and just super supportive. He never missed a football game of mine, for instance. He always made dance competitions for my sisters. Um, Gosh, that man was under a lot of stress. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's a tough industry to be a part of, but like I said earlier, it's a heck of a life. So it's not easy by any stretch of the means.
Yeah. Well, I hope that this 3.5% suicides does reduce. And I really do hope more people can be like you and just be passionate about this, become interested in the industry and get new people. I mean, you're fifth generation, but how do we, how does the agriculture industry get new people in that have no background at all? How do we get that to happen? So there's just a lot to think about, and it's so important for our society as a whole, in the United States, not just in the United States, but globally. We need more
Yeah.
people that know how to do this and do it right, and people who are passionate about it. So I hope the future is bright for agriculture and farming. But Adam, just let me tell you, thanks again for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. So if listeners do want to learn more about Adam and his farm, you can check out the farm's Instagram or Facebook, and you can find that at Blanchat uh, Organic Farms, and it's BLANCHAT underscore organic underscore farms, or you can or you can follow Adam at his farm there, and you can send questions to him through the Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, and he'll be happy to get back with you about anything he talked about today. So, for listeners, because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are: do you agree with Adam's assessment of where the agriculture industry is going in the future? Why or why not? Will we see more or less family-owned farms and ranches in the future? Why or why not? And why are more farmers committing suicide? And can this be prevented in the future? So let me know. I'd love to know. Text or call me at 1-785-473-3721, or send an email message to me at ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website, and that's BenKohlITYS.com. That's BenKohlITYS.com. And you can go there to connect or get your own I Told You So items. You can choose from shirts and hoodies and hats and coffee mugs and lots of other items. The I Told You So podcast is a space for healthy discourse and effective discussions with the goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. Also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. So thanks for tuning into the I Told You So podcast, and thanks again to my guest, Adam Blanchat. Followers of the podcast are very important, so please follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.